"Ma'am, you need to know what your son's wife has been hiding." The whisper came with a trembling hand on Margaret Collins' wrist. In that instant, her world tilted. The cake she was holding tumbled, the plastic lid cracking open as frosting smeared across the grocery store floor. Shoppers gasped, clerks froze. The humiliation burning her cheeks was nothing compared to the fire those words ignited inside her chest. 67 years of dignity couldn't shield her from the question now clawing at her bones. What secret? And why now? Margaret Collins, 67, had lived a life of sacrifice. But that afternoon, under the cold glow of the grocery store lights, one whisper shattered everything she thought she knew. The birthday cake she carried slipped from her hands and burst open on the linoleum floor, buttercream smearing like a wound. The entire checkout lane froze. Just moments earlier, the young cashier had gripped her wrist, his voice trembling as he delivered words that sliced like glass. "Ma'am, you need to know what your son's wife has been hiding." Margaret forced a shaky smile, pretending it was just clumsiness, but inside her heart raced. Gossip, surely. And yet, the pity in his eyes made the whisper impossible to ignore. The next morning, she returned. This time, the cashier slipped a folded note into her change. "They spend hundreds every week. Imported food, expensive wine. I've seen the receipts. Why are they begging your son for rent?" Margaret's hands trembled as she read. Later, driving past her daughter-in-law's neighborhood, the truth struck like a lightning bolt. Richard Miller, her son's father-in-law, leaning against a brand-new black sedan, shopping bags from luxury stores dangling in his hands. The whisper was no longer just a whisper. It was a storm gathering, ready to break. Her voice cracked as she whispered to herself, "Danny, what have they done to you?" If you were Margaret, would you confront your son immediately or watch quietly until you had proof? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might give courage to someone else in the same fight. And before the storm unravels further, don't forget to subscribe to Silent Tear Stories and hit the notification bell. Here, we share tales of sacrifice, betrayal, and the twists that turn victims into victors. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below. Maybe the next story will remind you of your own journey. And now, the watching had a pulse. It thudded in Margaret Collins' ears as morning light slid across her kitchen table and lit the stack of proof she'd begun to gather. Receipts, screenshots, a crumpled packing slip rescued from a curb. The lantern of truth was no longer a notion. It had weight, paper edges, ink that wouldn't wash off. She forced herself to breathe. If truth is a lantern and fear is the wind, then hold the lantern closer. By 9, she was back at the grocery store, not for food, but for courage. Frank Dawson stood at his lane, the fluorescent lights washing him pale. He didn't look up when she stepped forward with a prop list of eggs and bread. He simply scanned, bagged, and slid a folded printout beneath the loaf. "Mrs. Collins," he said evenly, like quoting a price, "if I stay quiet and your son gets hurt, I won't sleep again." A beat, then softer. "It's not everything. It's enough." In the driver's seat, Margaret unfolded the pages. 1 week of receipts, the same name in stark black letters, Richard Miller, champagne, imported salmon, foie gras, totals that felt like a slap to the mouth. She pressed the stack to her lap, fighting the urge to rush to Danny's door. Not yet, not with threads. Bring him the whole cloth. That afternoon, Margaret parked 2 blocks down from Brianna's place, the old Buick clicking as it cooled. A box truck idled at the curb. Movers wrestled a crate stamped with a Luxury Interiors logo up the steps and through the front door, laughing like men who'd never had to count coins for a cake. When they drove off, a paper fluttered loose and skated to the curb. Her pulse jumped. She stepped out, strolling like a woman without a mission, protecting the knees she'd promised herself to save for winter. She bent and lifted the slip. Carrara marble sideboard. $2,480. The number cleaved through memory. The wedding ring she'd pawned for Richard's prescriptions. The winter coat she'd never bought. Dinners stretched to broth. She folded the slip as carefully as a flag and taught herself a new kind of prayer. Let my son see what numbers say when words lie. Across the street, a green compost bin leaned open like a careless confession. She hesitated, then crossed. Beneath coffee grounds and wilted mint lay a glossy envelope, boutique furniture, white glove delivery. She wiped the corner clean enough to photograph dates and order codes, then put it back. She wouldn't take what wasn't hers. She didn't need to. Paper trails told better stories than thieves. Her phone buzzed. Carolyn B. flashed across the cracked screen. Saw Mr. Miller this morning. Financially, he's not drowning. Be careful. Paper trails are powerful. See Margaret type back with grateful thumbs. Thank you. Paper trails it is. She had the trail. Now she needed the map. Back home, she turned her table into a quiet war room. Frank's receipts went left. The packing slip. Photo went right. Screenshots from Brianna's feed, the family emergency weekend that somehow included clinking glasses in Napa, lined up across the center. She circled dates, drew arrows, underlined totals. Patterns emerged like bruises. Money out when luxury in. Each line sang the same tune. Help us. Just a little more. She paused, palms flat on the table, eyes closed. And then she did the bravest thing she knew. She prayed, not for revenge, but for clarity, for the right words to keep Danny close when the truth cut. Let me be a door he can walk through, she whispered, not a wall he breaks against. Evening thickened around the windows. The phone rang. Mom, Danny breathed, threadbare. Brianna says Dad needs a minor procedure. Insurance won't cover everything. We're $200 short. Could you, just this once, help? Margaret swallowed the iron taste of anger. Of course, she said too quickly. Bring Brianna by tonight. I'll give it to you in person. He exhaled relief. You're a lifesaver, Mom. She set the receiver down, pressed trembling hands together. Yes, she thought, just not the kind you're expecting. They came a little after 7. Danny's exhaustion hung on him like a wet coat. Brianna glided in. Wine-dark nails, salon shine, a fragrance Margaret had once admired from a safe, affordable distance. Mrs. Collins, Brianna sang, you look lovely. Margaret smiled with the strength of women who have learned to carry storms. The table held a teapot, 3 cups, and an envelope. Brianna's eyes flicked to the envelope, hawk-sharp, reflexive. Danny sat. Brianna remained standing, like a director who didn't intend to relinquish the scene. Margaret poured tea. My mother used to say, before you lend money, lend your eyes. Brianna's smile tightened. I don't follow. I think you do. Margaret opened a folder and laid the evidence between them. Receipts, screenshots, the marble slip, dates ringed in red, totals that left no room for stories. Danny's brow furrowed. Mom, what is this? She said, voice steady. Is what you've been funding. Brianna's laugh was brittle crystal. This is invasive, Margaret. Snooping, collecting. Out of line. Coincidences don't repeat for months, Margaret answered, and neither do emergencies. Danny rubbed his temples. Just explain it. Brianna pivoted, voice sugared. Baby, I told you. Dad's had a rough quarter. Repairs, co-pays. I find deals. We stretch every dollar. Margaret slid the final page forward. Frank's week-long compilation, dates standing like centuries. Frank risked his job to hand me this, she said, because he watched a woman count coins for a birthday cake while the people taking her son's money paid cash for champagne. Brianna's eyes blade brightened. Who is Frank? The cashier who watched my cake hit the floor the day the first truth arrived, Margaret said. Then she looked at Danny, not at Brianna. Son, I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to look, not at me, not at her, at the math. Silence held the kitchen by the throat. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Danny swallowed. Where's the envelope? Margaret slid it across. He opened it, expecting cash, and found a single crisp 20 and a note in his mother's careful hand. Before you lend money, lend your eyes. Mom. Below it, a short list. Local family finance audits. A counselor experienced in financial abuse. Something in Danny's face shifted. Shame, anger, confusion, grief. Clouds colliding behind his eyes. Bree, he said quietly, I need to go home. I need to look through our statements. Tonight, Brianna's polish cracked. Absolutely not. You are not turning our private finances into a witch hunt because my mother brought facts, he snapped, sharper than Margaret had heard in years. He softened immediately. I'm sorry. This is a lot. Brianna jabbed the air at Margaret. She never accepted me. She's poisoning you. Margaret stood, anchored. I accepted you the day you brought soup when I was ill. I wanted to keep accepting you forever. But acceptance isn't blindness. Brianna's eyes cooled to glass. You're old, you're lonely, and you're dangerous to my marriage. Then save it, Margaret said softly, with truth. Danny rose, gathered the papers into the folder, and kissed his mother's forehead, a gesture he'd forgotten. He turned to Brianna with a steadiness that felt newly minted. If I find nothing, I'll apologize to both of you, and I'll mean it. But if I do... He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Mini cliffhanger. Brianna lingered in the doorway, perfume trailing like an alibi. She glanced back, a small smirk nicking her mouth. You think you're clever, she murmured. All you did was make him suspicious. That's easy to fix. Good marriages don't need fixing from the outside, Margaret replied. They need honesty from the inside. The smirk wavered. Brianna left. The neighborhood folded into night, windows lighting like quilt squares. Margaret sat alone at the table and poured more tea with unsteady hands. Beneath the tremor, her chest felt strangely still, like a lake after thunder. She had not screamed. She had not accused. She had set a lantern in the dark and stepped back. Her phone buzzed. Carolyn? How did it go? Margaret typed. The truth walked out the door with him. Now it has to walk back in on its own. Hours stretched. The phone rang again. Danny. Mom, he rasped. I went through the statements. A breath that sounded like breaking. There's a notebook in Bree's purse. I never looked before. I looked tonight. Every emergency is written down. Plans for the next. Funds. Margaret shut her eyes, pain and relief colliding. I'm so sorry, son. I'm coming over, he said. I need to show you something. 10 minutes later, he stood in her doorway with a small spiral notebook in his hand, his face pale but newly clear. Read it with me. They sat at the kitchen table where the lantern had been set. Line by line, lie by lie, the ink thickened into evidence, not a weapon but a shield. She read the coldest entry twice because she didn't want to believe it had been underlined. Danny equals stable stream. Don't overdraw. Keep him tired. Grateful Danny's jaw worked, but his voice, when it came, was steady. She wrote about me like I'm an account balance. Margaret reached across and held his hand. Helping is holy, she said. Being exploited isn't. You gave love. They gave lies. That difference matters. Danny nodded, eyes bright with resolve rather than rage. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we stop this. Margaret squeezed his fingers. Tomorrow. The storm finally had a shape, and in its path stood a son who had opened his eyes and a mother who would not close hers again. If you were Danny, would you confront your spouse immediately or take the notebook to a mediator first? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your insight might be the lifeline someone else needs tonight. I heard something strange about my son. I didn't believe it, so I watched. Now there was nothing left to watch. It was time to act. Morning broke in a pewter sky, as if the weather itself expected a verdict. Margaret Collins parted the curtains and stared at the spiral notebook on her table, its edges worn from the night's reading. Brianna Miller's handwriting marched across the pages, crisp, merciless, practical. Cry on phone, say dad's sick, mention rent hike, ask $200, use Danny's guilt, remind him of college bills mom helped with. Underlined twice like a rule of business rather than a vow of marriage. Danny equals stable stream. Don't overdraw. Keep him tired, grateful. Margaret closed the notebook with a shiver. Not just manipulation, she murmured. A plan. The word tasted like metal. Across from her, Danny sat forward on his knees, head bowed, eyes rimmed red but clear. She wrote about me like I'm an account. He swallowed. All these years, I thought I was helping. Margaret laced her fingers through his. Helping is holy. Being used isn't. You gave love. They gave lies. That difference will matter today. Danny straightened. Something in his posture clicked into place. No more secrecy. No more stories. Tonight, we end this. He slid the notebook into his jacket. I'm setting the table with the truth. The afternoon moved in purposeful steps. Margaret dialed Frank Dawson first. I won't drag you into court, she said, but if Danny needs confirmation... A pause, a small breath. If telling the truth helps your son see, I'll stand by it, Frank replied. Some things are worth the risk. Then Carolyn Brooks. If Danny needs deposition records, she promised calmly, I can confirm deposits. Paper trails don't panic, Margaret hung up, palms cooling as resolve settled in. She'd spent a lifetime offering her son quiet sacrifices. Tonight, she would offer him something fiercer, witness. By dusk, Brianna's text arrived like a gilded invitation. Family dinner tonight, 7 p.m. Margaret read the words twice. Family, she repeated softly, as if testing whether the word still meant what it used to. They arrived to a house staged like a magazine spread. Glass gleam, leather glow, a chandelier scattering light like a spill of diamonds. Richard Miller sat at the head of the marble table, a king in borrowed grace. He lifted a wine glass that likely cost more than Margaret's monthly utilities. Margaret, he said smoothly, a pleasure. Sit. Tonight we celebrate family. The word curdled on Margaret's tongue. She took her seat beside Danny. She could feel the notebook's weight under his jacket, solid as a stone, sharp as a blade. Dinner arrived in procession. Roasted duck lacquered in citrus, sides dusted with herbs Margaret used to grow in her windowsill. The flavors were exquisite. All she could. Taste was theft. Halfway through, Brianna leaned across the glow, smile sugar sweet. Danny, Dad's medical costs have gone up again. We'll need another $300. You always come through. Danny set down his fork so gently it was almost tender. Then he stood. The room shifted. Even the chandelier seemed to hum. He took the notebook from his jacket and laid it on the table like a verdict. Not this time, Brianna blinked, feigning confusion. What's that? Your playbook. Danny's voice didn't rise. It resonated. Every lie, every trick, every time you converted kindness into currency. Richard leaned forward, the diplomat. Hold on now, let's not... Danny's palm closed the notebook with a flat smack, like a gavel. No, you hold on. I worked double shifts while you drank champagne and called it emergency. I believed because I wanted to. You counted on that Brianna's mask cracked, anger flashing like a blade. You went through my private things? That's invasion, Danny. Margaret's voice cut across the linen silence, low and steady. This isn't invasion. It's revelation. Privacy protects intimacy, not exploitation. Danny flipped the notebook open and read, "Cry on phone." Use Dad as excuse. So tell me, Bree, was he sick? Or was that just a script that worked? Richard opened his mouth, but Danny's gaze snapped to him, cold and clear. "How many times did you call me swearing you couldn't afford medication while scheduling furniture deliveries and stocking wine racks? You used me. You used my mother Margaret's words were soft, iron-weighted. I sold my wedding ring for you, Richard." I remember the pawnbroker's hands. She tapped the table once. "Do you remember?" Richard's bravado faltered. "We had expenses, unexpected." "Unexpected?" Danny's voice sharpened. "Planned, written in ink." He slid a page forward with 2 fingers. "If I'm your ATM, consider this the out-of-service sign." For a beat, no one breathed. Brianna's chair screeched as she stood. "You're pathetic, Danny. Without me, you'd still be a paycheck-to-paycheck boy in off-the-rack shirts. I taught you how to climb, and this is how you repay me?" Danny straightened until the room had to look up to meet him. "Respect built on lies isn't respect. It's rot. I won't live in a house that looks polished and smells like decay." Brianna's hand darted up, a quick, instinctive strike, but Danny stepped back. Her palm sliced only air. The gesture hung there, ugly as a bruise. Margaret rose, voice a calm storm. "Do you see yourself now, Brianna?" "Because we do." Danny drew a folded document from his pocket and placed it beside the notebook. "These are divorce papers," he said quietly. "Filed this afternoon. Tonight I'm telling you to your face. This marriage is over. The court will see the receipts, the deposits, the notebook." Brianna's jaw dropped. "You can't—" "I already did," Danny said, "and you'll find the judge harder to manipulate than me." Richard sputtered, clinging to the old word like a raft. "Family doesn't do this." "Family doesn't strip you for parts and call it love," Danny answered, steel ringing in his tone. "If that's your definition of family, I want no part of it." He turned to Margaret then, and his voice gentled. "Mom, I'm sorry it took so long." "Thank you for seeing when I couldn't." Margaret placed her hand over his. "Truth always arrives," she whispered. "Sometimes it limps." "It still arrives." Brianna sagged back into her chair, eyes hardening into calculations. Richard studied his wine like it might provide a script. The chandelier light trembled. Danny gathered the notebook and papers, each page a rung on the ladder he was climbing out of a well. He looked at Brianna one last time. "I loved you," he said. "I wanted to believe you. But love without honesty is a leash." He lifted the folder. "I'm done wearing it." He and Margaret stepped out into the night. The door clicked behind them like a seal. Cool air rinsed their faces. Danny exhaled, a long, shaking breath that turned white in the streetlight. "It's done. I thought saying it would kill me." He shook his head, astonished. "I feel alive." Margaret threaded her arm through his. "That's what truth does. First it cuts, then it heals." They walked to the Buick, the marble house shrinking behind them. In the quiet of the car, the dashboard clock ticked like a metronome. Margaret remembered the day she'd pawned her ring, how the sun had felt too bright, the world too loud. Tonight felt different. The world had the right size again. Her son's breath evened. She could almost hear his shoulders lowering. Her phone buzzed. "Frank, everything okay?" Margaret typed back. The truth was louder than fear. Another buzz. "Carolyn, if he needs documentation, call me tomorrow." "We will," Margaret replied. "Thank you for the lanterns you lent." They reached Margaret's apartment close to midnight. Danny set the folder on the table, then paused at the window, hands braced on the sill like a man who'd just swum to shore. "I kept thinking I'd be alone if I left," he said, "but I felt more alone staying." Margaret's smile was tired and bright. "Loneliness is not the price of dignity. It's the cost of lives." He nodded, then pulled out his phone. "I'm changing the bank passwords tonight, canceling her access. Tomorrow I'll move the rest of my clothes, call a lawyer, schedule counseling. He glanced up. If I start to backslide, I'll walk beside you, Margaret said, not in front. Beside his phone lit with Brianna's name, call after call. He let them roll to voicemail, then a text. You'll regret this. Come home now. Another. We can fix this if you stop listening to her. The third. You owe us. Danny set the phone face down. No, he said to the room, to himself, to the night. I owed love. I paid it. I don't owe lies. The next morning, because life does not pause for triumphs, Margaret brewed coffee and fried eggs. Danny ate like someone whose hunger had returned to him. Between bites, they planned bank appointments, a meeting with an attorney, therapy referrals. The ordinary rhythm felt profound. Mom, he said suddenly, I want to pay you back for the ring. Margaret shook her head. No, keep the money. Buy a lockbox for your future. He laughed softly. Okay, a lockbox. He reached for the notebook, flipped to the underlined line, and crossed it out with a firm stroke. Stable stream gone. Gratitude reclaimed. They drove to the attorney together. On the way, they passed the grocery store where a cake had once hit the floor and a truth had begun. Margaret asked to stop. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed as always. Frank caught sight of them, startled into a smile that felt like sunrise. Danny stepped forward first, offering his hand. Thank you, he said simply. Frank nodded, eyes glassy. Just did what I'd want someone to do for me. You did more than that, Margaret replied. You lit a path. They left with nothing in their hands but everything in its place. Outside, the morning had shifted. The pewter sky had thinned to silver. Ready? Margaret asked. Danny opened the passenger door for her, a small, old-fashioned courtesy that suddenly felt like a vow. Ready. The fight with lies was over. The work of building truth, paper by paper, boundary by boundary, had just begun. If you were in Danny's place, would you have walked out that very night or waited for the legal process to unfold first? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might give someone else the courage to step into the light. I heard something strange about my son. I didn't believe it, so I watched. What I found tore a family apart, but also stitched something stronger in its place. The night of the confrontation felt like a funeral and a baptism all at once. A false family died at that dinner table, and a true one was reborn in its ashes. As Danny drove back to Margaret's modest apartment, silence filled the car. But it wasn't empty. It was alive, charged, almost sacred. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, but his gaze stayed clear, determined. Margaret studied him in the dim glow of the dashboard. For the first time in years, she saw the boy she had raised, the one who'd stood up to bullies with quiet defiance. That boy was back, older, bruised, stronger. The following days blurred with paperwork and court filings. Danny stacked boxes in Margaret's hallway, his suits folded into the same drawers that once held his childhood sweaters. The apartment grew crowded, but Margaret didn't mind. She found joy in cooking his favorite meals, slipping little notes onto the counter. Don't forget lunch. Proud of you. Danny, lighter despite the storm, laughed more. He fixed her leaky faucet. He teased her about her old squeaky recliner. For the first time in years, they didn't just share space, they shared peace. But peace was not free. It had to be defended. Brianna and Richard did not fade quietly. The phone rang at midnight with messages dripping poison. Betrayal, theft, betrayal again. Once Brianna showed up at Margaret's door, eyes wild. "You ruined everything," she screamed. "He was ours. You had no right." Margaret did not flinch. Her voice was calm steel. "Truth ruined you, Brianna, not me." She shut the door, slow, final. From the kitchen, Danny had watched, awe shining in his tired eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "you're stronger than anyone I know." Margaret shook her head gently. "No, son. I've simply stopped being weak." Months passed. Divorce hearings stretched long, but the evidence stood taller. Frank Dawson's quiet testimony, Carolyn Brooks's financial records, receipts, screenshots, the damning notebook. One by one, Brianna's strategies collapsed under the weight of paper and truth. The judge's voice was clipped, cold, final, division of assets, restitution where possible, vows legally severed. Danny walked out lighter, though poorer. Over $15,000 had vanished into their schemes. But his eyes, Margaret noticed, were brighter than they'd been in years. "I lost money," he admitted, "but I gained clarity. And that's worth more." Margaret looped her arm through his. "Money returns. Peace doesn't come with interest. It comes with choice. And you chose well." At a local church fundraiser, Danny met Laura Bennett, a school counselor with kind eyes and a laugh that didn't ask permission to be heard. She wasn't draped in jewelry or luxury. She wore cardigans with fraying cuffs and carried notebooks full of her students' scribbles. Margaret noticed the shift quickly. Her son's steps grew lighter, his voice more thoughtful. One evening, Danny brought Laura to dinner. Margaret watched the way Laura set the table, the way she listened, the way she laughed with her whole chest. This, Margaret thought, is what honesty looks like when it breathes. Friendship blossomed into love, steady and unhurried. Margaret didn't push. She simply gave thanks each time Danny came home smiling. One afternoon, Margaret returned to the grocery store. Frank Dawson was still there, scanning items with practiced rhythm. His eyes widened when he saw her. She placed a loaf of bread on the counter. "Everything turned out better than okay," she said softly, "because you spoke." Frank ducked his head. "I just did what was right." "No," Margaret corrected gently. "You did what was brave." Brave changes everything. They exchanged a nod. Quiet, weighty. The lantern of truth had passed hands, and it had done its work. Sunlight poured into a quiet nursery, painting golden stripes on pale walls. On the dresser lay a tiny onesie, small enough to fit in Margaret's palm. She touched it, tears stinging her eyes. Danny stepped in, smiling. "Mom, ready to be grandma?" Margaret laughed through tears. "I've been ready since the day you were born. But this time, it feels like we've earned it." She held the onesie to her chest. "This child will never know the lies of yesterday." Only Love Danny wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Because of you." Margaret leaned against him. For decades, she had worn sacrifice like armor. But now she carried something better, dignity, and the knowledge that justice, though slow, had finally arrived. If Margaret could step out of the story to speak to you, she might say, "Respect isn't owed by blood. It isn't bought with money. It's earned through love and honesty. Family can wound, yes, but it can also heal. And you, no matter your age, no matter your scars, can choose truth over silence." And maybe she'd add, eyes glinting with that quiet fire, "Always lend your eyes before you lend your hands." Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? If you were Margaret, would you have gathered proof quietly or confronted the lies the very first moment? Share your thoughts below. Your story may give someone else the courage to stand up. Don't forget to subscribe to Silent Tear Stories for more tales of sacrifice, betrayal, and redemption. Every story reminds us, justice may arrive late, but when it does, it speaks louder than lies. And if this story touched you, leave a message. For yourself. For someone you love. For someone who needs courage tonight.